laureate of Afro-America. In the same way that the United States had a poet laureate, black people selected a poet laureate, and it was Langston Hughes. I would argue that Langston Hughes and Amiri Baraka they are not just the most prolific, but they are probably the two greatest cultural artists that Afro-America has produced, right? In addition to being artists, they were also revolutionaries, right? Revolutionary artists. Now, Hughes wrote in every genre. He's the first black person to live solely off of his writings, meaning that after age 20, 21, he never worked another day in his life except for in terms of his art. He created a genre of poetry called musical poetry, what Langston Hughes wanted to do in the 1920s. Like, he looked at European writing and he saw that, the British had that sonnet. And Hughes said he wanted to create a style of writing that flowed from African American culture. So what he created is generally referred to as musical poetry. So we're talking about his blues poems, blues poetry, jazz poetry. He wrote poems that mirrored the spirituals, right? Because he's trying to draw from African American culture. Now, Hughes lived a long time, and he wrote a long time. He published his first poem at age 19. I've known rivers. So he wrote from 1920 to 1967 when he died. In fact, a poetry book entitled The Panther and the Lash, talking about the rise of militant resistance in the form of the Black Panther Party and the Backlash. That's the last book he published, 1967. So during his lifetime, his 47-year career of writing, Langston Hughes participated in 3, I'm going to call them social cultural movements, meaning that they're movements to change society, but they're linked on using culture to do so, right? So the first is the Harlem Renaissance. And the Harlem Renaissance is what we kind of know about that, right? The next is the proletarian literary phase, and that's a period in which writers write about working class themes, and they try and use a realistic portrayal of the working class across race, right? And how they deal with things. And the emphasis, of course, is on changing the nature of capitalist society. And then the last phase is the popular front. And it's similar to the second phase, except for it's a little bit softer. In other words, think Bernie Sanders as opposed to Lenin. Right? A little softer, a little more acceptable. Now, and as I mentioned, Hughes dies in 67, so he dies on the threshold of a 4th social cultural movement, the Black Arts Movement, or BAM, right? Black Arts Movement. Now, to understand Hughes, we have to periodize his political poetry in terms of its relationship to these social cultural movements. Because what he tried to do was have his writings, particularly his poetry, serve the movement that he was participating in. This isn't just individualism. He's trying to serve the collective cause of the liberation movements, right? The other thing we have to periodize and pay real close attention to, right, is that Hughes is trying to pick up the cadence, the movement, the style of the black urban working class. So we have to be clear that the transition, right, the first great migration, the move of black people, when we think about it, we tend to think about it as a movement from south to north. It is that, yeah, absolutely, it is that. But more importantly, it's a movement from the rural areas to the urban areas. And there's a big difference between people raised in a rural environment and people raised in an urban environment, right? It has a lot to do with capacity to organize, capacity to resist, right? And capacity to build things. You go into a rural area picking cotton, right? Sharecroppers are making 75 cents a day. You come north to Detroit, work for Henry Ford, make $5 a day, right? That's a lot more money to put into building your institutions, right? You put it to your family, send a kid to college, right? All of those kinds of things. So this urban piece, and you know how we walk, right? That's the urban thing. They don't walk like that in the rural area, okay, right? In those rural towns, where they got those, you know, white folks got guns like they do today and they dominating. You know, you got to tip your hat to a white person, right, when you see them. You got to get off the wood planks that make up the sidewalk and get your black ass in the mud, in the road. In the city, go around me, I'm not moving, right? We all bleed. It's a different thing, okay? So Hughes is drawing on that energy. Now, in talking about about writing, there's two concepts we need to grasp. One is what we call authorial ideology, and that means what is the author's social vision? What are the ideas that the author is trying to convey, right? The other is aesthetic ideology. How is the author conveying their ideas, right? So for Langston Hughes, well, let's flip it back. Claude McKay, great black socialist poet from Jamaica. But he's from Jamaica, and he grew up in that British stuff. So he writes all of his poems in the sonnet. Now, if you know anything about a sonnet, it's a very restrictive, right? Very restrictive poetic style, okay? You got 14 lines, and I think it's 7 words per line. I mean, it's, you know, that's like being in a cage, right? Hughes writes, he doesn't want to be restricted like that. So he puts his emphasis on freedom. So you get jazz verse, right? You get blues, which has a little, some restrictions. So we got to pay attention to aesthetic ideology, right? The form that the poem takes. Now, as I said, Hughes, we want to divide his political poetry into 3 phases. And what I'm going to do is read a poem per phase, and then we'll try and talk about it, right? So now for this first period, and I'm calling that period racialism and Afrocentrism. The racialism refers to the ideology, that his emphasis is on race, defending the race, right? Because that's the term they used in the 20s when we talked about ourselves, we said the race, right? Dress for the race, right? Be impressive for the race. And then this concept of Afrocentrism. Now, by Afrocentrism, I mean both that black folks are the agent, but in this sense that he is drawing his style, his form, his mode of poetic writing from African American culture. So we're talking jazz poems, we're talking blues poems, we're talking spiritual poems, right? Jazz poetry, spiritual poetry, etc. Now, so this first moment, racialism and Afrocentrism, we can actually divide it into 2 phases, right? The first phase, which is just clearly racial and Afrocentric, and the second phase where we begin to see some left ideas merge in. Now, in the back, I've got the poems that we're going to look at, right? Now, this first poem, I've Known Rivers. This is probably Langston Hughes' most famous poem. This is the first poem he gets published, right? Now, according to Langston Hughes, he was riding across the Mississippi River. And as he looked at the river, it came to him about African Americans and their connection to the river, right? Now, you look at African American culture, there's a lot of metaphors about water in the spirituals, in R&B, river. These things are strong metaphors in the African American tradition. So Hughes wrote this poem, I've known rivers. I've known rivers, ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden brown in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Now you see how he's connecting different experiences to rivers? Now this is one of the things that we got to be clear on about the Afrocentric perspective. In many ways, it's messed up. Okay? It's messed up. And one of the ways we see it as messed up is here, this phrase about what he has to say about the Congo. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. See, in what we call Ethiopianism, the philosophy that African Americans developed in the midst of slavery, one of the things that they argue, because they had to explain why were we enslaved. And the argument as to why we were enslaved became, one, we turned our back on the one true God and began to worship the many gods. And the other is that we come out of a tropical environment and everything was given to us and we got lazy. Now these are explanations that we created. So when he says, I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep, that's an argument that we didn't remain active and vital and virile, okay? You're gonna get some of that when you deal with Afrocentrism. You're gonna get notions of fixed gifts. We are creative people, right? So we gotta be clear about what that means, see? In the 19th century, white folks said that white people, Europeans, had intelligence, Asians had a kind of spirituality, and black people had creativity. They had the gift of song, laughter, and dance. Now understand what that means, if that's a fixed gift. And that's why during the 19th century, white people referred to Africans as the female of the races. So when you adopt that notion that our gift is creativity and cultural creation, you're adopting a white racist perspective. Because they're the ones that started with that bullshit. And we bought into it and have since acted like we came up with it. No, they put that on us a long time ago. All right, so I want to flip to the 1925 to 27. This is a moment where Hughes is beginning to bring in other ideas. He writes his first leftist poem in 1925. Well, actually, that's not true. Hughes wrote his first leftist poem when he was 15. When Langston Hughes was in high school, he used to send socialist poems to The Liberator, which was the major socialist magazine in the country. It was edited by, I can't think of the white guy, but the black guy was Clark McKay. He was the co-editor. And this is when Hughes was a teenager. See, we gotta understand, Hughes developed his consciousness a long time ago, and he stuck with it, right? Okay, so Hughes wrote this poem, and it's called Rising Waters. Very short, right? To you, who are the foam on the sea, and not the sea. What are the jagged rocks, and the waves themselves, and the force of the mounting waters? You are the foam on the sea, you rich one, not the sea. Now, this is a hell of a poem, right? I take that poem as the title of my forthcoming book, right? Rising Waters. Now, what is Hughes doing here? One, he's taking the image of sea and foam, right? And he's providing for us a picture of racial class oppression in America. Think about it. The foam on the sea is wealthy. It's white, right? Foam is rich. It's the rich. It's white. And foam also on the sea is ethereal. What I mean by that is not permanent. Okay? It's an aberration. Now the sea, the deeper you go in the sea, the darker it gets. Right? The deeper you go in the American class structure, the darker it gets. And when you get to the bottom, it's us. Okay? It's dark, black, and us. Okay? So what Hughes has done here is he's taken in this very short poem and he's created a metaphor for racial and class oppression in America. It's an allegory for racial capitalism. It's dual labor markets. It's social stratification, right? And then when he asks, what are the jagged rocks and the waves themselves and the force of the mounting waters? He's talking about resistance. He's talking about resistance to the foam, because the mounting waters, the jagged rocks, they break up the foam. You ever see a wave hit a rock? The foam dissipates. Okay? So Hughes is talking about resistance. He's talking about the insurgent masses. Now this is 1925. He born in 1902. He's 23 years old. Okay? Now, I'm going to shift to his second period. Okay? Second moment. And this is what we're going to call left nationalism and left nationalist realism. And what I mean by that is that left nationalism is a political perspective in which black nationalism is merged with Marxist concepts. So you bring class into the argument, right? And left nationalist realism is the aesthetic ideology, meaning that he's going to write about the experiences of working class people from the point of view, right, of a left nationalist perspective, a revolutionary nationalist perspective. Think the Black Panther Party. Okay? Now, the type of poems that he writes in this moment are going to put an emphasis on blackness, right? But it's going to be about a socialist revolution. So what I would argue here is his greatest poem, Air Raid Over Harlem. This is a long poem, but it's necessary for us, okay? I think it's necessary. So, let me try and do this. Scenario for a little black movie, who you gonna put in it? Me. Who the hell are you? Harlem. All right then. Air raid over Harlem. You're not talking about Harlem, are you? That's where my home is, my bed is, my woman is, my kid is. Harlem. That's where I live. Look at my streets, full of black and brown, yellow and high yellow jokers like me. Lennox, 7th, Edgecombe, 145th. Listen, hear him talking and laughing. Bombs over Harlem kill people like me. Kill me. Sure, I know the Ethiopian war broke out last night. Bombs over Harlem. Cops on every corner, most of them white. Cops in Harlem. Guns and billy clubs, double duty in Harlem. Walking in pairs under every light. Their faces white in Harlem. And mixed in with him, a black cop or two. Gusta's a criminal too? A traitor too? No, sir. I ain't talking about you, Mr. Policeman. No, indeed. I know we got to keep order over Harlem, where the black millions sleep. Shepherds over Harlem, their armed watch keep. Least Harlem stirs in his sleep and maybe remembers, and remembering forgets to be peaceful and quiet, and has sudden fits of raising a black fist, becomes a red spark. Planes over Harlem, bombs over Harlem. You're just making it up. A fake funny picture, aren't you? No, not real, not real. Did you ever taste blood from an iron heel planted in your mouth in the slavery time South, where you whipping niggas easy as hell, and not even a living nigga has a tale to tell. Least the kick of a boot, bringing more blood to his mouth in a slavery time South, and a long billy club split his head wide, and a white hand draw a gun from its side and send bullets spraying through the streets of Harlem, where the dead are laying. Least you stir in your sleep and remember something you better keep in the dark. In the dark, where the ugly things hide under the white lights with guns by their side. In Harlem? Say, what are you trying to do? Start a riot? You keep quiet. You niggas keep quiet. Black world, never wake up. At least you knock over the cup of gold that the men who keep order guard so well, and then, well, then there'd be hell to pay. And bombs over Harlem. Air raid over Harlem. Bullets through Harlem. And someday, a sleeping giant waking to snatch bombs from the sky and push the sun up with a loud cry. Up to hell with the cops on the corners at night, armed to the teeth under the light. Least Harlem see red and suddenly sit on the edge of its bed and shake the whole world with a new dream as the squad cars come and the sirens scream and a big black giant snatches bombs from the sky and picks up a cop and lets them fly into the dust of the Jim Crow past and laughs and hollers, "Kiss my..." Hey, scenario for a little black movie. You say, a red movie to Mr. Hurst. Black and white workers unite as one in a city where there'll never be air raids over Harlem, for the workers are free. What workers are free? The black and white workers, you and me. Looky here, everybody. Look at me. I'm Harlem. Now, I argue that that is Langston Hughes' most realized revolutionary